quick thing that I wanted to say, we're gonna have a questions block after each talk. So if you have any questions, you can ask that in the YouTube chat on the right, and we will be asking the questions to each one of the guys after each talk. If you do have questions in the meantime, feel free to ask them. We'll be collecting them and asking them to the guys. With that said, I think we're good to jump into Jamie to start the first talk about managing diabetes with the JAMstack. Jamie, you ready?
Yep, let's do this.
Cool.
So I think if I share screen.
Yes, you can take over.
Okay. Can you see the slide deck okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. And is it coming through okay on the stream? Because it's on a big display. So I just want to make sure it's not hard to read or anything.
I think it looks great on
right,
my end.
Brilliant. Okay, so I will start my timer. Here we go. Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming along and listening to me to talk, and good afternoon to anyone from Seattle, and good evening for those from the UK. My name is Jamie Bradley. I'm a front-end engineer who is very passionate about modern and intuitive approaches to web development, so this includes JAMstack. I'm the co-founder and the CTO of a company called StackUp Digital. We're a northeast, based in the northeast of England. We're a digital agency who specialize in headless content management solutions and headless e-commerce solutions. And I've been working with the JAMstack for a very long time, long before it was coined as the term JAMstack. We're probably going back as far as 2014. So if there's anyone else who's been working with this approach to development since then, you might be familiar with static site generators like Cactus and many more. So I kind of go far back in that sense. But today I'd like to talk to you about a couple of things. As well as being passionate about JAMstack and web development, I'm also passionate about this thing, diabetes. And the reason being is because on the 23rd of December 2013, when I was 14 years old, I was actually diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I was kind of remember this day for us forever, really. I was really scared. I had no idea what to expect. I was even more scared when I was told that I was going to have to inject insulin with a needle for the rest of my life, because I never used to be particularly great with needles. And I don't want to spend a great deal of time talking about, biology and diabetes, but we kind of need to go through it in order to understand what the problem that I'm trying to solve is. So diabetes is a lifelong condition that causes a person's blood sugar level to become too high. And if you've ever come across the term diabetes, you might be familiar with these two groups that it falls within. We have type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Now, this information here is taken from a blog that I wrote on my website, which you can find at jamiebradley.dev. So if you want to get some more insight into this kind of stuff, then feel free to check it out. But the reason why I've highlighted the type 1 section of this screenshot is because that's what I suffer with. Now, type 1 diabetics are unable to create a hormone called insulin. So a healthy person or a person without diabetes has a pancreas, as we all do, and it creates a hormone called insulin. So whenever you have some food, you eat the food, and the sugars from that food will go into your bloodstream. And insulin is the hormone that we need to break blood sugars down. With a diabetic, a type 1 diabetic is unable to create any insulin at all, so blood sugars get really high, and that's how diabetics become ill. Someone with type 2 diabetes is able to create some insulin, but not quite enough to be, classed as a healthier individual. So the way that it's treated is handled slightly differently. So the focus of this talk is going to be very much around type 1 diabetes, because that's my experience. So why does the body do this? Well, we don't really know, which is kind of crazy, but researchers and scientists are constantly looking into this and trying to come up with ways to fix it. But yeah, as I've kind of alluded to, type 1 diabetes is where the pancreas can't create insulin, and the reason for this is because the pancreas has these cells called beta cells, and these are the cells that are responsible for creating the insulin hormone. And for some unknown reason that we don't know why, the body kind of treats these beta cells as an antibody. So the immune system attacks them and they die, and we don't have any, and they can't be recreated. So diabetes is actually what we class as something as an autoimmune disease. Now, as I kind of mentioned earlier, if we don't have insulin, glucose is going to build up in our bloodstream. And as a result of that, people who are undiagnosed with diabetes end up going to the toilet a lot more. They'll wee a lot more. And the reason for this is because there's so much glucose in your bloodstream that your body is trying to get rid of this through the kidneys. So part of this talk is to kind of make you aware of what diabetes is. So something to look out for if you know your friends are complaining about being ill and they're saying they're going to the loo a lot, they might be diabetic. So is diabetes a dangerous disease? So to answer this question, I'm going to present some statistics, and I just want to make clear that the statistics are taken from the Diabetes UK website, so they might not necessarily be the same in the States, but in the UK, as it stands, around 4.7 million people have diabetes, and that's not type 1 or type 2, that's both types. And in the UK, if you're familiar with the way our health system works, we have a system called the National Health Service, which is like a state-funded health service. And diabetes itself costs the NHS £10 billion a year. So that's the equivalent of £19,000 per minute. And someone is diagnosed with diabetes, whether it be type 1 or type 2, every 2 minutes. So immediately we can see that diabetes not only has an impact on people's health, but it also has an economical effect. And the scary thing is that 4.7 million number is rising all the time. So of course the cost is going up all the time. Diabetics are 4 times more likely to have a heart attack, 3 times more likely to suffer from heart failure, and 3.5 times more likely to have a stroke. So, from a health perspective, diabetes can be very dangerous. This isn't to say that it would be, by having diabetes, you are going to fall into that category. It depends on how it's treated, which is something we'll look at in a moment. And diabetics are 20 more times likely to experience an amputation. So people who have, badly managed diabetes and end up being affected with long-term health conditions can experience feet amputations. And the reason for that is because you can get ulcers in your feet, infections in your feet that can't be, where your body can't basically heal itself. So unfortunately, the only way to stop the infection is to amputate. So in answer to that question, yes, diabetes is pretty dangerous. So how do we go about treating diabetes? Well, there's a couple of ways. I've kind of already talked about, how diabetics either don't create enough or don't create any insulin at all. So from this perspective of a type 1 diabetic, we have to get that insulin back into our body somehow. So, what I mentioned earlier about being scared of needles, the first way that I managed my diabetes was through an insulin injection, very similar to what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen. And then another thing that we do is we carry out a blood test. So we need to figure out how much sugar is in our blood at the time of taking an injection. So we have a machine which is inside of here. I'll quickly pull it out. We have these things here which are called Lancets. It's like these little strips. And then we have a little pen which has a needle inside of it. You prick your finger with it and it releases some blood, like in the picture on the right, and that goes inside of a strip, which will then be read by a meter, much like this. And it'll give you a number, and I believe in America the numbers are slightly different to the way they are in the UK, but in the UK you're trying to aim for a reading of 8 as a diabetic. A healthier individual would probably have a reading of around 4 or 5. So yeah, an alternative way of treating diabetes or type 1 diabetes is with something called an insulin pump. And this is what you're seeing on the screen now is the approach that I take. I have a machine here, which I'm showing on the camera. And on my arm, which I can't show you because I've got a hoodie on, I have something called a glucose sensor and a transmitter. So the sensor is attached to my body, and it's basically detecting sugars inside of the fluid under my skin, getting the reading from that and then sending it to the insulin pump via a Bluetooth connection. And then the insulin pump is actually capable of providing you with insulin based on the numbers that are being sent through the transmitter. So effectively what I'm using here is I have 75% of a pancreas back with effectively some, what's the word I'm looking for, with an algorithm that's working out what the reading needs to be. It's quite awesome, really. So the reason why it's really good to have these kind of things is because the better the treatment, the smaller the chances are that things will go wrong. And the reason for this is because if you've got really good treatment like this, you can analyze test results, you can spot trends, and you can start making changes. And I kind of mentioned this earlier about the complications that you get from diabetes, in that if you have high blood sugars for a long period of time and you don't make any changes, then that's when things start going wrong. Because you've got high blood sugars, organs start to fail. When we talk about the heart attacks, when we talk about strokes, liver failure, kidney failure, these are all things that can be the result of poorly managed diabetes. So the way that we can, spot these trends and log this information is in a couple of ways. You might do something through a mobile application. So there are plenty of apps out there on the App Store for Google and iOS respectively. But some of them actually ask you to pay for them, which I kind of understand. I run a business, I understand how businesses run, but I personally don't like the idea of monetizing from a disease that can't be helped. You can go back to pen and paper, which is the thing that you can see on the top right with the little exploding head emoji. There's a printout that you can get which has every day of the week, every meal of the day, and you basically write down what your blood results are, how many carbohydrates you're eating, and how much insulin you've taken, and then you can literally look at it and spot trends. That works for some people, but for me, not so much. And then, of course, you can rely on technology, on insulin pumps, and, it's all good and well me sitting here saying that it's great. Like, I have a state service that's going to give me access to this technology, but that's not always the case. And I appreciate the diabetics in America in particular. You have private healthcare, so getting access to this kind of technology isn't always isn't as easy as it is over this way. So I kind of at the start of this year decided that I wanted to take a bit of a stand and do something a bit different. I wanted to develop a community-driven blood sugar management application that would avoid in-app purchases in order to use it. It would be easy to host and deploy, and the reason it needs to be like this is, again, to save money. So we're going to look at services that we can use for free to be able to get this functionality. We want it to be secure because we're posting our, I suppose, personal information on there, and it needs to be fast. So we need a really good experience. And of course, we're drawn to the JAMstack in order to do this, because the JAMstack brings these benefits out of the box. So the next slide, and please forgive me for my illustrations, but is kind of like a high-level architecture of how I wanted this to work. The problem that I suppose, kick off with a negative, is that there's a little bit of effort involved in getting this thing up and running. You do need to be technically minded. You need to have a GitHub account. You need to have an account with Netlify, and you need to have an account with Sanity. So this system is very much targeted towards developers at this stage, but mainly as a proof of concept, which I'll go into later. But my idea was to host the system on GitHub, and then use something called Sanity Create. So if you've ever come across Sanity, which is a solution for structured content, you could go to sanity.io to find out more information. But Sanity have been working on a tool called Sanity Create, which is it's almost like a one-click installer. If you think back to the good old days of installing WordPress from your cPanel, where you would click on the WordPress installer and provide some config, and it would install it onto the server for you. It's that kind of feel, but from a JAMstack approach. Users would then use Sanity as the blood sugar tracker, so they would put their records in there, and then this would instruct Netlify to run a build, and this is where our front end comes in. So the front end has been developed in Gatsby and hosted on Netlify to be distributed across the global CDN, so that it's fast wherever you are in the world. And that's kind of like the way that it would work. And the benefits of having an approach like this is that it will be easy to deploy with the Sanity Create. It's easy to manage dependencies in this way as well. It's open source, so it's free, I suppose. It's there for people to contribute to if they want. It would be easy to use and easy to customize, secure, fast. And then the big thing for me, or the main drive behind this, is that it's easy to share the information with your GP. You know, it's quite cumbersome to take your blood monitor into the GP and then or your healthcare professional and go through your blood results manually via a button. But you know, if we can do this on a tool like this and show them a graph, it will allow them to help you find trends a lot quicker. And finally, it's being built by a diabetic for diabetics. So, you know, like I understand what the needs are for people and that's what I'm delivering. So the project is called Hey Sugar. And there's two links there on the screen that you can go to. There's heysugar.health, which is some documentation, and then there's our GitHub as well. Now I have factored in a very, very quick demonstration. I've got 5 minutes, so I'm going to just switch over to the different screen. So we talked about, you know, this idea of using the Sanity Create earlier on. So literally yesterday, I managed to get this onto Sanity Create so that I could show it to you today. But for ease, I'm going to just quickly show this Loom video to show you what it would look like. You would go to the Sanity Create URL, which is available on our GitHub, complete the information like this, and then simply click Create Project. And Sanity Create is then creating the project for me on Sanity. It's doing a clone from the repository that it's created for me because it's connected to my GitHub account. And then it's basically deploying the tracker and the client, which is the front end respectively for me. So what was, when I first built Hey Sugar, about 15 minutes worth of work is now being completely streamlined by 3 clicks and entering a bit of text in some fields, which is awesome. So I'm really, really happy with that. So what you get out of the box when that's being complete, you get a tracker, which is something like this, and then you get a front end, which is something like this. So again, because I'm conscious of time, I would normally show this end to end, but I'm just going to kind of show you it as I've put it in earlier. If we were to look inside of the reading section, this is where a person would come in and maybe do a blood test and enter their results. So for example, if I was to come in here and say that my bloods were 4.6, I could then say whether I'd taken an insulin dose. So again, this is very similar to the piece of paper that I mentioned before. I could say, yeah, I've taken 10 units of insulin. And then I'm asking users how they feel when they take the test, because funnily enough, your mood can have a huge impact on your blood sugars. So if you're stressed, if you're anxious, if you're on your period, all of these things can have a huge impact on your blood sugars. I'm quite happy right now, so I'm just going to tick that. In this case, we've taken some insulin, so it would have been before a meal. And then again, asking the question of if you've drank any alcohol when you take the test, because alcohol also has a huge impact on blood sugars, especially when you're diabetic. Haven't at this time. And then this is something that I really liked about what I was able to do with Sanity. So inside Sanity, you have this concept of like, you can create relationships between fields. So you might have noticed here that on the left-hand side, we have like a food section, and inside of my lunch, I've created an entry for ham and cheese sandwich with 3 slices of bread. And the reason I've done that is because I kind of have this regularly. This is always my lunch. So instead of having to input all of this information every time in the reading, I'm able to pick from a lookup what my food is. So I can select the ham and cheese sandwich, and then I can put some notes in there. This is a test. So by clicking publish now, just bear with me. That doesn't seem to have published. By clicking publish now, this will send a instruction over to Netlify to trigger a deployment for me. So if I was to bring Chrome through again, we should be able to see now that the deployment's been kicked off for us. It's all looking really good. And then when we come back to the front end, we will eventually see that there is a reading there. I'm obviously not going to make you sit there and watch a deployment log while we go through it. But if we were to take this 8.5 reading and then click on view, we can get some more information as to what this is. We can see what we've eaten. We can see the mood. We can see any notes. We can see what time the test was taken, how much insulin we had. And again, this is all valuable information that, you know, doctors and healthcare professionals might want to look at if they find an anomaly inside of it. Another thing we can do, which is actually in a previous example, not this one, so I'll just quickly bring that up. So inside of the system, inside of the Hey Sugar system, I've created a settings option where you can put your name if you want to. You don't have to. You can anonymize it. and you can set what measurement unit you're using. So I mentioned earlier on that measurements differ between the UK and the States. This is how you can change it. What your highest blood sugar reading would be, what your lowest blood sugar reading would be. So this is for people who are diabetic or are familiar with diabetes. These are things that you would normally input inside of your blood monitor. And this is what I've enabled on this other example, is this graph example, but it's experimental because it's not being fully tested, so you kind of use it at your own risk. But again, if you have a lot of information, it can all be plotted out onto the graph, which is very similar to what we get on the insulin pump. If I just show you very quickly. So this is like what I get on my insulin pump, and I'm basically trying to replicate that functionality onto a web browser for people who are unable to use insulin pumps or continuous glucose monitors. This is kind of the closest thing to it. And again, you can, assuming you had hundreds of results here, you could scale down and zoom into it so that you could start picking out anomalies with doctors and whatnot. So that's pretty much everything with Hey Sugar, and I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so, as I've mentioned before, Hey Sugar is still like a little bit of a work in progress. I started working on the project in May. I was hoping to be a lot further forward than I am now, but, day job and things have been getting in the way. But we are always open to, collaborating with other people. Do find us on GitHub and star us and keep an eye on it. We've had a couple of contributions already, which have, been small or big. They've all gone a very long way because they all help. But yeah, I think that's everything. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jamie. I don't think that we have any questions at the moment, so okay. We do have the chat open, and we have a new guest. So I think we can jump to James.
Awesome. Yeah.
And then we can do a questions block at the end with everything. Yes.
Flora, we did actually have one question. Maxine was asking. Would it be possible to automatically post your readings from your blood sugar monitor?
I would like to say yes, but there's various factors that need to be considered on that. So it would depend on things like if there's an API for one, and if the person that manufactured the blood sugar monitor would allow for it. There is another project that was that someone called Scott Hanselman really promoted. He's a Microsoft developer and also a diabetic. And I can't for the life of me remember what it was called. Someone in the chat might know. But basically it's sort of like Hey Sugar, but it takes it to the next level because it pairs with hardware. So if you're looking for that kind of feedback, you might need to look at that. I think it's called Night Watch or Night Scout, I think it's called. So it's available on Google, but kind of do it at your own risk. If you've got any hardware that's fairly new and it's under warranty or under any kind of guarantee, then that's going to be void the minute you start changing it. But I think a lot of people, what they tend to do is they'll go on Craigslist or something and buy an old insulin pump and an old monitor and then just toy around with it that way. That's a really good way of learning how to do it. But yeah, I wouldn't sort of advise doing it without those risks being made aware.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just like to add that it's really refreshing to sort of see a real use case of JAMstack that's not just building a website that does stuff for your customers, and it's actually something that you obviously are clearly very passionate about and can really help the world. So I just want to say kudos to you. That's awesome.
Well, thank you very much. And I know I've kind of limited this particular project to two technologies. I have talked about Sanity and I have talked about Gatsby, but this kind of thing can be replicated for other systems as well. Anything that's got the flexibility similar to Sanity. So Strappy, I've never come across Agility before, James, so I'm not too sure how much you can do with it. But anything that you can manage structured content with easily and a database on the other end, you can recreate this kind of thing as well. It is something that we're possibly maybe going to look at, but the main drive for Sanity at the moment was because of the create. Basically, it just means that people can get on board a lot quicker. But yeah, if anyone else, the point of the talk as well was to try and inspire people to think outside the box on that front, see if there was something else you could do other than just building a marketing site or a blog or a shop or something.
Yeah, I think you did a great job of showcasing that. And like you said, the technology pieces you chose, like whether it's like what did you use for the front end? Was it Gatsby, or did you use Next.js? Or?
Yeah, it was Gatsby. Yeah.
But like all those parts would be interchangeable, but you'd still be able to accomplish the same sort of thing. So it's just cool that you can really sort of pick and choose all the components that sort of make up your JAMstack, but you can still do a lot of those same things. Yeah.
What makes it even more interesting is that, like, when I built this, incremental static generation by Next wasn't a thing, whereas now that would be like a brilliant combination for it, because you could get your data a lot quicker, or even better, I suppose, you could fetch the data at runtime through Ajax requests and things as well. So there are certainly other ways of doing it. Again, if anyone has suggestions and they want to make a contribution, feel free.
Nice. Thank you, Jamie, for creating such an amazing tool and for sharing it with us. I think, as James was saying, I think that it's amazing that you saw a problem and you took it, and instead of either not doing anything about it or just creating a marketing site, you created a tool with the tools that the JAMstack provides you, and it's certainly great for what you did about the diabetes, and it's also an inspiration for people to go grab a problem and create a solution for it with the tools that the JAMstack has for you available. So thank you for sharing that amazing talk.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Nice. I think we're ready do you have any other questions, Slava?
No, that's it. I'm just gonna quickly try and switch this so we just have active speaker view. I didn't want to talk a little earlier. I think somebody was asking for that feedback. But yeah, no more questions. Just lots of praise for Jamie from Glenn and Alejandro. So thanks, guys.
Nice. Okay, so that said, I think we're ready for James. If you want to take over the screen, it's all yours.
Sure, let's do it. All right, how does that look?
Great.
Beautiful.
All right. I'll also preface this by saying my dog is a little high energy at the moment, and my dog walker wasn't able to come take her out. So you might see her pacing back and forth between me, and if she starts destroying something behind me, please let me know.
You're good.
All right. Yeah, there you go. Now she's lying down. She's good. All right. So, first of all, I just want to say thank you very much for having me. I've done a talk at the JAMstack Toronto Meetup and been involved there. So it was really nice to sort of collaborate with Seattle on this, and hopefully we can do this more often and share some knowledge, because there's lots of stuff to go around. And one of the things I always realize after doing some of these talks is that, JAMstack is still a very new concept to a lot of people. So I'm sure a lot of people tuning in right now, are really just kind of kicking the tires and wondering what JAMstack is and where it's at. Should I use it? Is it too new? That kind of thing. And, what I hope to do with this talk is shed some light on sort of the current state of it, especially how it pertains to like using it for real world applications, and where I think, it's doing really well and where we can do better. And we can continue to drive this technology and way of doing things forward. So my talk is about giving love to your X with headless CMS and JAMstack. And when I'm talking X here, I'm talking the editor experience, not your X partner or whatever. But before I get too far into things, for those of you who don't know me, I'm the VP of Product at AgilityCMS. As Flor mentioned, I'm been big into JAMstack for a while now, a couple of years. I guess I was a bit of a late bloomer, not as OG as Jamie. But I really sort of hooked onto the JAMstack concept when I've been working at Agility for over 8 years now, and I'm constantly talking with developers who are building stuff using our headless CMS, and a common theme would come up, and that's they have requests running at runtime, and they connect to not necessarily Agility, but some other slow resource like a database or something. And it like works fine locally, but then it's like you throw like 1 million users at it, and your whole website just crashes. And that's a really hard concept for a lot of developers to be able to sort of build applications that scale well. And so when I started learning about JAMstack, I was like, wow, that's like the solution to that problem. Like if you build a site with JAMstack, you can't possibly screw it up. Well, as long as it builds anyways. So that's what really got me involved in it. And for those of you, Jamie, like mentioned, you said you hadn't come across AgilityCMS yet. We are a headless content management system based out of Toronto, Canada. We've been around actually for quite some time. We were always headless, like a decoupled CMS, really since 2008, actually. Kind of before it was cool. I don't think anyone used the term headless back then. JAMstack wasn't even a thing back then either. And we sort of started off building a really tight integration with Microsoft, actually, Microsoft.NET. So like you build a site in .NET, and it worked really well with the platform. We had an SDK that would synchronize content from our headless CMS down to your site. We still have a lot of customers on that right now, but we're really looking at JAMstack as the sort of, the next sort of iteration of sites that are being built. And we have a lot of those being built in our platform right now. Several have already launched with great success. So we're really doubling down on JAMstack here and sort of getting away from the sort of traditional sort of server side rendering of things, and at least showing JAMstack as a viable alternative to a lot of this. So a little bit more about us. We are the only headless CMS with built-in page management, because that we strongly believe. So we have, structured content just like Sanity, but we also have a concept of pages, and that's sort of baked into the system. So it's really easy for editors to be able to understand how your content is organized, as it usually stems from pages on a website. It's been built, our whole backend, our whole CMS has been built by developers like myself over the course of a decade. So it's solid, it's not brand new, and we have a lot of enterprise customers using it. So we're big enough for billion-dollar brands, but at the moment we are also small enough to really care about each and every user. And if you don't take my word for it, here are some of our customers, just some of them. Some of them are really big Canadian brands, like I'm going to plug the Hockey Canada thing in there. But there's also some really big American brands that are on our platform as well. So what Agility's vision is, and the reason why we really build our product and what we really care about is we want to build an environment that can, we want you to be able to build a system that's going to stand the test of time. And so that when you rebuild your website as a company or as an individual, you're not starting from scratch every single time. You're not tossing everything out the window and starting from scratch, because that's really hard to do, especially when you're talking like, millions of content items and that kind of thing. Like that's really hard to do. So what we're trying to teach everyone is, be able to build fantastic content architecture, structured content, and be able to build that foundation to stand the test of time. And that's what everything we do, all of our features are all built towards that goal. But from actually building a site, like a website, the success of that involves three pieces, and that's the user experience. So that's the user experience of actually the people actually using your website. Obviously, if you're building a website, you want your users to be able to use it. That's number one. Second, you need to be able to provide a good experience for your editors. How do your editors, the people that are actually the stakeholders of your website, going to manage their content? If they can't manage the content easily, you're not going to have a successful site, because they have trouble actually managing and updating the content. And then lastly, the developer experience. You need to be able to give a good experience to developers to actually build the site. And we think, if you can nail all three of those factors, you're golden and you're off to the races, and you're in a really good state to be able to succeed. So, let's take JAMstack, that concept, and put that aside for now. Let's look at how do these sort of experiences stack up in different scenarios? So let's think, you have a website, but you don't have a content management system, which means you can't really manage the content. You're a developer, you have to go in there and, if you want to change content, you're going to go into your code, change it. Even if it's marked down, you would have to go into code, change that, and deploy it. So that is actually a pretty good experience for a developer because the developer is comfortable in that environment. They can update things easily, and they really have full control over the user experience. So, the world's their oyster. But when you're looking at the editor experience, if you're not a developer, you're kind of out of luck, right? You can't really update content. You have to rely on a developer to update the content. So there really is like a non-existent editor experience there. So not a great editor experience. Kind of altogether, it's not going to be that great. Fast forward a little bit, and then it's like, okay, let's look at traditional CMSs that we have sort of come to know over the years. Things like WordPress, Drupal, Sitecore, technologies like PHP, .NET. They actually did a really good job with the editor experience because they've been built over the course of years, and marketers and editors, they love their WordPress. They still love their WordPress today. Same thing with Drupal, Sitecore to a certain degree in the enterprise. Great editor experience. They have a lot of control over their content. However, the developer experience can be a little underwhelming. You're very strict in terms of what you can and can't do, what technology you have to use, whether it has to be a certain framework or not. You're really sort of hemmed in what you can do. And because of that, the user experience can also hurt, right? If you can't do what you want to do, you may not be able to deliver the best user experience to your users. So it's like good, but still not great, kind of underwhelming. Now let's look at let's look at building a website that is connected to a headless CMS, like Agility or Sanity, Prismic, Contentful, etc., and a JAMstack framework. Okay, great. Now we're looking a bit better. We've got a fantastic developer experience, amazing UX because we can utilize all this modern tooling. But again, the editor experience, we're kind of forgetting about it now. It's like the last thing we're thinking about. And this is where I really want to put a lot of emphasis in my talk is we're still not hitting it yet. Even though JAMstack's great, we can build a lot of things, we're missing out on the editor experience. And as long as we're doing that, JAMstack isn't going to continue to grow into the enterprise market yet. And if that doesn't happen, then a lot of people aren't going to be able to use JAMstack. So let's take a look and see, okay, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with the editor experience? And how can we, as developers, improve that? Because we have the tools available right now. We just need to make sure that we build it the right way. So let's look at what are the complaints? What are editors complaining about right now with JAMstack sites? Number one, common complaint is that they can't preview content updates in real time. And that's because when you build a site with JAMstack, your content doesn't update unless you rebuild your site. And that means it may take some time to rebuild your site. They're lacking the sort of quick feedback of being able to change content in a system and then be able to just open up a browser tab and see that change happen immediately. And they're so used to that, especially someone coming from WordPress or Drupal or Sitecore. They're like, how come it doesn't work like that? And they think something is wrong or something is broken. Number two, limited control over creating, deleting, and just managing pages in general. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's the idea of using headless CMS with structured content. The developer is creating all the structures and often just creates the routing directly into the app. And editors don't have control over creating brand new pages and controlling what content is actually on them. Which leads me to my second point, or my third point, is limited control over what is actually on each page, not to mention just managing what pages are actually in your sitemap. Then you've got inconsistent or inefficient content workflows. And this sort of leads back to hey, I published something, I went to my website, and I'm not seeing the update yet. And maybe it's delayed because the build in Netlify or something is taking a few minutes and they just haven't realized that and they don't really know what's going on. Or maybe a build failed in Netlify because something happened. They don't really have that understanding of, oh yeah, it's my build, I'm gonna go fix it, because they're not a developer. So that's another thing too, is you gotta look at that is how are you gonna handle feedback when builds break and that kind of thing. And then lastly, publishing content just takes too long. Even if builds do go through correctly, they don't want to be waiting, even if it's just a few minutes, it's them sitting there hitting F5 on a browser tab, trying to make sure that their content gets updated because it's their job. And if that content doesn't get updated, they're on the line, not the developer. So it's really important that we listen to these editors because they're the ones that actually drive all the content updates. My sixth point here, although I only have 5 points, but they feel powerless because of all of this. So we can do better. It's not a question of like, oh, we need to wait till these features come in. No, there's actually things we can do right now to address all of these things. So here's how. All right, Pup, it's okay. It's okay. Here's how. We're going to give them a preview environment, number one. Give them a preview environment where they can actually preview things in real time. I'm going to cover that in a moment and how you can accomplish that. 2, give them the gift of page management. Allow them to determine what pages are in their sitemap and what content is on each page. Again, this is what they come to expect from a CMS. They should be able to do that with JAMstack. And then lastly, publishing content, it's got to be fast, as fast as possible. And you have to constantly be looking at how can you make it faster and never be satisfied. So some ways you can actually do this right now. And similar to sort of what we were talking about with Jamie's talk, is that there's lots of different ways you can do this. What I'm talking about here is not necessarily specific to Agility, Next.js, or Vercel. You can do the same things with Gatsby and some other systems. But page management is one area where you'll see that Agility CMS really has an advantage over some of our competitors. So this is one of my favorite sort of stacks right now that I'm talking to a lot of developers about when they're saying, hey, I want to build a JAMstack site. I got a lot of pages. I have a team of editors. I'm going to build some stuff. Right now I'm saying, hey, use Next.js, use Vercel, use Agility. I'm trying to coin the term NavStack. I don't know how it's going so far, but I just let the Vercel team know today that we was doing a talk and I was using the term NavStack and they seem to like it. So we'll see if it takes off. But yeah, quickly, high level, what is Next.js? What am I talking about here? Next.js is a React.js framework that started off just being able to sort of be a more fully featured React app that you could actually run on a server and be SEO friendly. It started off as like, hey, I want to run React, but I want to run it in Node.js. That's sort of how the Next.js platforms began. It's open source. But recently, and actually Jamie mentioned it earlier in this talk, is that they just recently released static site generation. So you can actually statically generate your entire Next.js site, or you can actually have parts of it, actually run in real time, which is really cool. But similar to Gatsby, you can build a site with React.js and you can export it to just raw HTML. What is Agility CMS? I touched on it a little bit before. We are a headless CMS with headless page management built in, as well as structured content. And it's really geared for, teams where you have content, you need editors who aren't developers to be able to manage content. And then lastly, what is Vercel? Vercel used to be called Zeit now, but Vercel is a static hosting platform. Actually, I shouldn't say that. It's not necessarily just static hosting platform. In this context, we are talking about static hosting, but they can host, I think, some other Node.js apps too, or at least serverless functions. But it pairs extremely well with Next.js. And you'll see why. So preview, we're talking about preview here. What isn't this a static site though? What's the deal here? Yeah, it is a static site, but you actually can preview when you deploy to Vercel, and you can preview in real time. So let's see how this would actually work. So an editor is in Agility. They're in a CMS. They're on a page that they've been editing. They've added some components to the page. They're like, all right, I want to see how this thing looks. They click the preview button in the CMS. At that point, what actually happens is once you have your website that's deployed on Vercel, and our system knows what URL to load, it'll actually set a cookie in your site running on Vercel, which will then instruct Vercel to be like, oh, okay, when someone is in preview mode here, I'm not going to just give you the flat HTML or the cached HTML. I'm going to actually run this function in real time, and it'll return to you your content just like you would if you're running like a real-time site as opposed to static. So it actually runs at runtime or real time in Node.js. So the editor can actually see the content they're working on prior to publishing it and waiting for like a build to happen. And they can see that happen in real time, which is awesome. So easy. And that works just like it does essentially in WordPress world. So perfect. You can get that in place. Editors are going to be happy. As far as I know how this works, and I did run this through the Vercel team, but essentially you have a page request that comes in. Vercel essentially looks for that cookie. If it is a preview, they essentially run that page as a serverless function at runtime. So like the page request might be like a little slower than normal because you might have to go do some lookups to an API or whatever is happening to generate the page. But again, it's just for your preview, and it's just for your preview session. And then if it's not in preview, they just always return your sort of HTML build that's already there, and it's cached and it's lightning fast. So you really get like best of both worlds here with Next.js and Vercel for setting up a preview environment. From a high level, it's actually really easy to set this up too. Like, go to our website, AgilityCMS.com. You can sign up for the Next.js starter, get a free Agility Camp to get started. Click the deploy button to deploy the thing to Vercel to your own account, and then set the preview domain that you have from your Vercel app in Agility, so we know what your preview URL is, and that's it. It's super easy. You don't even have to be a developer to set this up, really. All right, I'm just doing a quick time check here. I'm going to see if I can skim over a couple of these because I don't want to eat up too much time. But I really want to look at page management because that was my sort of number 2 thing that I really strongly believe you need to give your editors for them to be happy and have a successful solution. And I'm going to start by saying, like, what isn't page management? That's the best way to explain what not to do. So I see this all the time, and this is in like every single JAMstack tutorial that I've seen online. Is like, you have a folder, it's called pages, and you like create a file there and you call it that thing, and that thing is your page route. And then the developer sort of determines, okay, I'm going to wire up these React components. Like this, for example, where it's like, okay, my About Us page is going to have an image slider. It's going to have something that talks about my profile, and it's going to have like a contact us form. This is essentially how people are building a lot of sites right now. And while you might have this hooked up to a structured content CMS that allows them to control what images are on that image slider, what's on your profile thing, what's on your contact us form, it doesn't give the editor the ability to create a page and control what order those components appear or what components are on each page. The developer is dictating that, which really, again, goes back to the editor feeling a little powerless. So they feel constrained, and really put yourself in their shoes, right? If they have to go to you every single time, or they can't modify certain things, they're going to feel frustrated. It's like you as a developer, someone said, hey, yeah, we have this great thing, but you can only build certain types of pages with predefined layout. You don't have control over this other stuff. And if that's your job, you're going to feel pretty powerless to be able to make an impact. So, that's really the same reason why developers don't like traditional CMS. So we really need to, listen to editors on that one. Still not convinced. So so let's say you actually do control all of your page routes, you're going to get inundated with emails from your editors, your marketing team being like, hey, can you create this page? We need this page. We need this campaign. Can you add these modules? You're going to spend all your time doing essentially content entry as opposed to actual real development. So that's why we at AgilityCMS are huge believers in stop building websites that are just like static and they can change some content. Build tools, build UI components that editors can then decide how and when they get put on pages, and so that they can actually compose the pages. So you just end up building tools as a developer. In Agility, we call these modules that they can then use to compose their actual pages. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Yeah, this is an example of like a module in your code. So, here we've got this this React component that I think it's using React actually, where it's like just a simple like rich text area. It just outputs like some text. This is like what you should build in your code. So it's like, okay, I have this component, it takes some props. And then in your headless CMS like Agility, you actually define what we call the modules that correspond to these components. And the fields that the editor can enter in those modules get automatically passed through to your code. and then editors can actually manage the order in which those actually appear. So for example, in our system on the left, it's like the editor sees a title, a subtitle, but then in your code, this is just how you reference them directly. So instead of giving editors controls to match like whole pages, you're really sectioning things up into reusable components that you can set up as you'd like. And finally here, with the Power Page Management, you give them the ability to create all the pages they want and control exactly what is on each page. But then finally here, the last point I wanted to highlight was like, okay, publishing. So it's like, all right, you got preview is good. The editor can create as any types of pages they want, and they can add any sort of UI component they want, at least that I've sort of predefined. The final thing is, all right, how do we speed up, how quick it is to publish content? So, the experience actually with using Next.js, Agility, and Vercel, or the JAMstack, is the editor in the CMS would go ahead and click publish. Then, either a user or, the person that just clicked publish, probably one of the first things they're going to do is open up a browser tab, like, all right, I'm going to go check my live site and make sure that content I just published is actually live. So they're going to go navigate to it and be like, okay, is it live? What actually happens is that Vercel will actually regenerate that page in the background. So if someone accesses a URL, the next time someone accesses that page, they're going to get an updated version of that page. So Vercel will actually go regenerate just that single page route and update that page for you. So that means that if Vercel is doing all of this work in the background, constantly refreshing your content, but the users always see the latest cached version. So the next user to go back to that page after you've published something is going to see the updated content automatically. And the biggest thing there is, look, Ma, I just published a bunch of stuff, no builds. When you first build your site, you do have to do a full build of your site, but you can, with Vercel, they sort of enable you to have these like incremental builds, right? Where they're just sort of rebuilding each page as opposed to having to rebuild the entire site. That means you can have, a site with like thousands or, tens of thousands of pages and not have to rebuild the whole site after every change, because that is just not realistic. So the power that Vercel gives you to be able to do that is pretty amazing. And I highly encourage you guys to go play around with our AgilityCMS Next.js starter, play around with how it works in Vercel and get a feel for it. What we have with our Github Starter is we're connected to a sample Agility instance that gives you pages and content. Behind the scenes, it uses the getStaticProps function, which is new for Next.js for static site generation. It supports full page management built in. So, we give you a handful of modules out of the box to play around with. And then in our CMS, you can just start creating brand new page routes and adding new pages directly through the CMS. You hit preview, preview will just work. You'll get the latest content automatically, no rebuilds or anything like that. And then we actually use the revalidate tag with Vercel, which kind of enables those incremental static builds where it just regenerates those one pages. So to sort of sum up my talk here, build modules, not websites. Build small components that your editors can actually use to compose the entire website. And trust me, you'll be a much happier developer. You'll have happy editors and hopefully happy users.
Thank you, James.
Yeah, thank you.
That was amazing. Yeah, I can confirm the editor request for having quick previews and the ability to have control over all the modules and the templates or anything that they can modify. They will love it. So I'm sold for the build modules. And so fantastic. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Do we have any questions, Lava?
So far, no. We do have a clap emoji from Maxime. Thank you for that. But
yes,
I'll take that.
Emoji.
Yeah.
Yes. So I do have one question. So you mentioned that you have page management. Is there any specific that you have for SEO? Because you are the one CMS that is handling page management different, and SEO is one of the big promises that we have on the JAMstack. So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, great question. So actually, I'll answer that question in like how you might do it in other headless CMSs. So like in other headless CMSs, like you don't really have a concept of pages. You just sort of have like, items or a list that you can sort of define and then query. So like you might have, let's say you have a list of blog posts. You as a developer, it's your job to be like, all right, I'm going to create this like content model called a blog post. It's going to have a title. It's going to have an image. It's going to have like a URL and a bunch of other fields, right? And then it's like, oh, but I should probably add like a meta description field or a meta keywords field. It's sort of that, it's up to the developer to be like, oh yeah, I should probably have this field for my editors. Right? And it's like, if they don't have that, then like an editor is like, hey, how can I manage my meta description for this? And then you're like, oh shoot, I forgot to give you a field for that. Hold on, let me go build that for you. And then it's like, you got to do the same sort of thing for any sort of page you might have. So it's like, it just puts a little more extra stress on the developer to be constantly thinking about, okay, do I have SEO properties? Can the editor control all these things? One of the things that people like about Agility CMS and our built-in page management is that everyone's concept of pages in Agility is the same across any type of instance you have. So, from different types of instances from different customers, obviously their content architecture is going to look vastly different from each other. They just have different types of content. But pages, those are like, a page is the page, right? Like you create a page in Agility, it has built-in SEO properties that are just always there. So you as a developer, it's your responsibility to be like, oh yeah, these fields are here. I need to make sure I actually output those in the right place. And we developed our starters with that in mind. So it's like, that just sort of is in there by default. So, we're trying to build these starter sites that sort of give you a lot more stuff that works out of the box, or at least be able to show you how it should work out of the box, so that developers can follow that and sort of not go down that problem of, creating an architecture system that an editor doesn't really quite understand. Because let's be frank, you're an editor and your job is to update content. Someone's going to be like, hey, we have this page here, update this content to change these words, and if they log into headless CMS with structured content, they're just all right, well, what list or item is that text even in, right? They have to like intuitively know how everything is structured, which isn't always easy. Whereas if you have, a page tree, for example, that can be like, oh, okay, well, I'm looking at the URL and based on the URL, I know where this page exists. And then I click on that page. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I see this module here that looks like it's outputting the same type of thing that I want to modify. They click on that and they see their content. So it's a lot easier for them to navigate where things are. And because of, we just give you all these fields out of the box that are consistent across anywhere you're using them, which also allow us to build greater tools that do more things for you, such as, SEO and that kind of thing.
Yeah, great. Nice. Sounds amazing. Can't wait to play with Agility CMS. Thank you. So I think we have some closing remarks. I can share my screen, I think. Let me take over. And let me know if it's showing. Yes?
Yep, looks good to me.
Cool. So some things that I wanted to mention is that, well, this is the first live event that we did for the JAMstack Seattle Meetup. We do plan to do way more. So we are open to receiving talks from the community, from anyone that wants to share anything, any tool or like the one that Jamie did, or a product like what James shared, and how that integrates with the JAMstack and how we can, inspire our devs to use those same things too. We are super open to receiving talks. So That's one. And then also, if you want to sponsor, if you have a product or a company that wants to sponsor one of our talks and showcase your product, we are super open to doing that. So head to JAMstack Seattle, Netlify that app, and at the bottom we have 2 boxes that will take you to 2 different forms, and you can fill out those forms to do that. That's one. And then the other thing that I wanted to say, I wanted to thank my and Slava's employer, ZipWhip. We work for ZipWhip and we're super happy. And because of that, we also want to say that we are hiring developers. So if you're interested, head to zipwhip.com/careers. We have some positions open and we'll be adding more. So yeah, and feel free to ask me or Slava any questions that you might have about ZipWhip. Always happy to answer. And yes. And thank you everyone for attending our first ever live stream. Thank you, James and Jamie, for being the first 2 speakers ever in our live stream. We're super happy. And yeah, thank you. And we hope to see you soon in the next one that it's hopefully also soon. So take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. It was really good to have you on.
It was a pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us.
Thank you, guys. Bye, Slava. Bye, James.
Bye,
Bye,
everybody.
Jamie.
See you later.
Goodbye.
Take care, you guys. Bye-bye.